Hello. Can you all hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Yvonne, Dr. Coates, Yvonne. Yvonne is our Faith in Action Fellow for our Safety Net project. I'm not sure you guys got a chance to meet, but so.
We not, Yvonne. It's a pleasure meeting you. I'm glad you could participate with us today. Yvonne, can you hear us? Well, Willie, are you still there?
Yes, sir.
Have you been in touch with the other presenters today?
Yes, I have. Deirdre and I had a call, and she and Allegra, they communicated, so I know they'll be on. And Elliot and Rachel from Raven, we spoke to them earlier. I spoke to them earlier today.
I don't know if I should call them, but I'm concerned about Yvonne because she's not hearing.
Okay, I'm hearing you now. I was just testing around and like, oh, believe it or not, it was just my microphone.
Okay, good. How you doing, Yvonne?
I'm well. How are you?
Well, I'm so delighted that we're able to partner together, and thank you for participating today.
It is very good for me to be a part of it. It helps me channel.
Sure. Good. We're delighted to work together, and thank you, Willie. Is Deidre going to be on the video on Zoom, or is she calling in?
She should be on it. She said she'd be on the video tonight.
Yeah. Okay.
The only panelist who will be dialing in will be Allegra. So other than Allegra, we're good to go.
Okay.
So for the panelists, when we're not speaking, we'll mute our microphones.
Now, Willie, I'm just seeing a profile pic of you.
Yeah, I turned my camera off for right now.
Okay. Will the beginning of the call receive an introduction from the company that's moderating the call?
No, sir. It's all us, all independent.
Okay. And so what you will give instructions, I suppose, I trust, for people who may have questions and all of this.
Yes, so I'm gonna cue that people can use the at the bottom of the screen. It should say Q&A, and there people can type in their questions.
Oh, okay. And what about folks on the line who may call in?
People on the line who may call in.
Hi, this is Allegra.
Hey, Allegra. It's a little
Hi.
difficult to moderate their participation because Zoom is primarily built for video conferencing.
Okay.
And in a different setting, the line would be open at the discretion of the moderator. But because we're in webinar mode, you either have to type it, you have to write in a question at this point if you want to be acknowledged. So I'm actually not sure how to do that with attendees who are tuning in by phone. I only know how to cue in panelists who are coming in by phone at this point.
I understand that. Perhaps what you can suggest is if any of them know any of the panelists, if they could perhaps text, if they have a question, they could text it to me or you.
What I can recommend is maybe folk could email if that's possible, and they could email the Black Church Center account, and we'll monitor that as the night goes on as well.
Right, and you have that email address?
Yes, I'll make sure everybody. I'll give out that information. It was supposed to be in my PowerPoint today, but I didn't get a chance to put all of our contact information in that.
And you'll be checking that email?
Yes, I'll be checking that email.
Good. I think this is the first call we've done Zoom. So this is good.
Yeah. This. I think so too, if my memory serves correctly. So you'll start us off, Doc, and I'll give some opening remarks after you, and then from there we'll just from there I'll turn it over to I'll give some instructions on how to participate, and then I'll turn it over to Allegra and Deirdre.
Okay, sounds good. Hello, Deirdre. Can you hear us?
She probably has her phone. All right, there's Elliot. So we're just waiting for Stephen, and then we'll wait. Stephen, Rachel, and I think we're ready after Stephen and Rachel join us. In terms of having perfect attendance with our panelists, with our speakers.
Deirdre, can you hear us?
I can now. I try to. Hi. I miss seeing you.
Yeah, same here. Hello, Elliot.
Yeah. I'm super excited. Yeah.
I trust, Willie, you've given everyone instructions on how long you want them to present or talk.
Yes. Everyone knows everyone knows how long we have. So we said 7 to 10.
Oh, perfect. Hey, it's Elliot Williams from the Committee for Fair Judiciary.
Hello, Elliot. How are you?
How are you doing? Hello, Reverend. Yeah, I'm wearing a Nike tennis shirt, and part of me wants to turn my camera off, but I guess Scripture says, "Honor in your heart, not your garment." So.
Well, I can't see your brand logo right now. So.
Okay, well, I got to change into a suit halfway through this, so I might click off my camera later on, but we're good.
And I'm sorry, I'm on the phone. I'm in the middle of giving 2 children dinner. So I was wondering if you were on, Allegra. Great. Yeah, I'm on. I'm just on the phone.
Pastor Francois, this is Reverend Green.
Hey, what's up, Reverend Green? So you're not videoing with us today?
No, I'm going to do audio.
Derek Green, Delman Coates here. How are you, my friend?
Ah, Dr. Coates, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing
great.
Hey, Willie, how do I get a picture of myself like that? That's pretty stylish, man.
Yeah, you you have to you in your profile. All you do is upload a photo, and it becomes your avatar.
I am so doing that right now. Where profile? Let me just see. I don't know.
Willie, how do we pause this video temporary? Like I trust you can come back in and out of the live video.
Yes, if you want to pause your video, the camera at the bottom where it says video, right next to the microphone, you just click on that and it'll
Stop video.
Yeah, it'll stop video.
Got it. With 2 minutes before we get started. Well, before we get started, just many thanks to all of you for participating in today's conference call. These issues that we'll discuss today are so critically important, and we thought it was necessary to really bring thought leaders together, pastors and faith leaders, to discuss ways in which we can address both the SNAP program and farm bill, and certainly are there ways we can stop, this Supreme Court nomination. We've got to fight. We can't be passive on this one. And so just on behalf of the Black Church Center, thank you for consenting to participate. All of you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Willie, do we receive some I don't know how this works. Do we receive some indication when people calling in are on? Or?
Yeah, those are things that only I can see on my end, and so people are populating now, and then we'll start right on time.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I'm getting ready to as soon as you start, Doc, I'll share the feed to Facebook, so we'll be live on Facebook and here.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And hopefully I'm doing it from the Black Church Center page and not my own.
Okay.
Sharing the page you manage, that merit. Black Church Center.
We ready to begin, Willie?
Yes, sir. Go for it.
Well, good evening and welcome to all of you who are dialing in, logging in online or on Facebook Live. Welcome to this evening's online town hall hosted by the Black Church Center for Justice and Equality. I want to thank all of you and all of our partners for making this evening's conversation possible. The Black Church Center for Justice and Equality is a theological think tank and policy advocacy group for principally for African-American churches and faith leaders who are interested in helping to make our world a more fair and a more just place for all people. I'm going to turn tonight's call and conversation over to the new president of the Black Church Center for Justice and Equality, Pastor Willie Francois. Pastor Francois, the line is yours. But again, I just want to thank and welcome all of you who are calling in today. Do connect with the Black Church Center for Justice and Equality. Make sure we have your contact information so that you can stay informed and abreast of all of our actions. Pastor Francois.
Thank you, Dr. Coates, for opening us up, and thank you for founding this great organization that convenes us today. We want to start a conversation around two very important issues that will need our full attention for the month of September. If we want a September to remember, it's going to require that we put pressure on our elected officials, particularly our legislature, and so our legislators. So today we're going to engage two issues. One will be the 2018 Farm Bill and the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court. And we'll have persons who are deep diving into the policy details who will walk us through this experience. But before I do that, I want to acknowledge the fact that Senator Cory Booker was not able to join us today because of a scheduling conflict, but he did record a message for us, and I am looking forward to sharing that with us in the next several moments. We're talking today about the future of democracy and also who has the right to eat. The Farm Bill, as we'll hear from the representatives from the Center for Community Change, will talk to us about the particulars on that bill. But right now, we are looking at a farm bill that is deeply evil and mean-spirited by the way that it will treat children, the way it will treat our environment, and the way it stigmatizes Black and brown folk, and also how the bill penalizes and repenalizes persons who are formerly incarcerated. And so we are going to hear ways that we can tackle that legislative issue. One moment now, I'm going to share my screen just for a moment, so you'll see a shift in the screen. But I want to share my screen for a moment to walk us through some of these points that I just made. Dr. Coates, who is our founder, opened us up, our founder and the current chair of the board, he just opened us up. But so when we talk about the Farm Bill, one key component of the Farm Bill that we want to pay particular attention to, and that is the provisions for SNAP, the authorization of SNAP. There are currently 41 million persons in America who benefit from SNAP. This is an anti-hunger program that we formerly was known as food stamps, but this anti-hunger program, in a real sense, helps to cut against and deconstruct the food apartheid that exists in America. I intentionally say food apartheid and not food desert because deserts are natural phenomena, but apartheids are manufactured and perpetuated by policy. And so hunger in this country is really an issue of policy. It is a type of structural evil. And the current House version of the bill, which Allegra and Deirdre are going to talk to us about, it threatens to expand the hunger apartheid in America. Again, it harms the environment, it cheats children, it penalizes the formerly incarcerated, and it stigmatizes non-white communities. And really, the work requirements that are being added to the House version of the Farm Bill are working lock and step with the president's declaration, the President Trump's declaration that the war on poverty has been won and has been successful. which is really a relaunching of a war on the poor. By ending the war on poverty, we're launching a war on the poor. And that is a type of structural evil, is a type of systemic demonic force that those of us who are called to prophetic ministry must address. And then we have the issue as it relates to Brett Kavanaugh, who is Donald Trump's second nominee to the Supreme Court. Washington, as we know it, is now a conservative monopoly. The Republican Party owns all three branches of government, which makes our fight all the more necessary. And so Judge Kavanaugh, he's 53 years old. He can easily serve another 30 to 35 years on the court, as it is a lifetime appointment. And his record is what really frightens me. His anti-voting rights, anti-women's rights, anti-affirmative action, anti-affordable health care, and anti-marriage equality really frightens me and threatens to take us back to even the days where the Supreme Court was not a friend of non-white communities in this country. And so we're thinking about this from the moral lens of who has the right to eat. That is the importance of the phone bill, and who has the right to govern. This is very, very important as we think about who runs our democracy, and who this next Supreme Court appointment is a part of that question of who runs our democracy. And this farm bill raises some serious questions on who has the right to eat. Is food a human universal right? And so, as I said, Senator Booker was not able to be with us, but here's a message to us from him.
Thank you so much for giving me a few minutes to talk with you at this very important gathering of people of faith leaders. I am who I am today because of an activist faith community. And I know every single day I enter the United States Senate that I would not be here if it wasn't for the Black church, if it wasn't for church leaders, if it wasn't for activists of faith who understand that faith without works is dead. We now have many pressing issues that highlight this moral moment for our country. These aren't partisan issues. This is not right or left. This is right or wrong. Let's take the Farm Bill, for example. There is a Senate bill and a House bill. I voted for the Senate bill because of an array of programs that support the social safety net and in many ways make progress for working people, struggling folks. I'm a senator that lives in an inner city, predominantly Black and brown community that is low income, hardworking people who bring home not enough resources. And many of the folks in my community, at my corner bodega, they use, in effect, food stamps. Now, that program is essential. The House bill, unfortunately, threatens to cut that program savagely. Hundreds of thousands of Americans who are now enjoying those benefits would lose them at a time that many of us know we need to expand the social safety net because Americans are working harder and harder, but in real terms, making less money because the cost of everything is going up, but their wages are not. For a moral call in our country, we must protect programs that support people who are struggling in the wealthiest nation on the planet Earth just to make ends meet. So your voice, not just on the Farm Bill, the Senate version, but speaking up for these programs against treacherous lies about these programs that make people forget the fact that the biggest beneficiaries of these programs are young people, children, or elderly folks. And there is a huge segment of folks who work full-time jobs, often in restaurants, serving food that they can't afford to buy because their salaries and wages are too low, stripping the dignity of work away from folks. We need to address these issues, not just with food stamps and other programs, but God, please, we need to be raising wages for Americans as a whole. Secondly, I want to talk about Justice Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court. This is problematic in the fact that the President of the United States is a subject of a criminal investigation, that he has now been, by his own personal lawyer, alleged to be a criminal co-conspirator in criminal behavior. Now, no one is above the law, whether you live in my community or whether you are the President of the United States. And one of the most fundamental basic ideas is that you should not be able to pick who is your judge. Well, right now, the President of the United States has picked the one person on his list supplied to him by conservative think tanks that has said openly, hey, I don't think you should be under any kind of criminal investigation. And if any of these matters come before the Supreme Court, you can rightfully assume that he would protect the president. But more than this, he would tip the court dramatically away. His record on voting rights, on civil rights, on workers' rights, on individual rights. This would be an assault on so many of the gains that we as a nation have made in affirming civil rights and voting rights and workers' rights and the rights of everyday Americans against large multinational corporations, the obscenity of money that's pouring into our politics. All of these issues, we know how Kavanaugh would likely decide. In fact, on something as, I believe, sacred and urgent, a right, this idea that every American, if we're created equal, should have equal opportunity for everything from an education to basic life-saving health care. Well, we know there is a case already working through the federal courts where very basic ideas like, hey, if you have a pre-existing condition, you should not be able to be denied health insurance. Well, that can now be decided by the Supreme Court in the near future. And Kavanaugh, we know what he would decide. We can get back to a place in America where people are being denied insurance coverage, cast into bankruptcy and worse, because they can't afford to get medical coverage. For all of these reasons and more, your voice, your leadership, your work is critically important. These are challenging days. We have darkness casting shadows over our land. But the light of the Lord, the church, which is not about a building, but the body of Christ is the church community, is us as individuals. This is our moment of calling. Thank you for answering that call. Thank you for this gathering. And I know whenever 2 or 3 are gathered together in his name, he is in the midst. And so I wish you the best in your righteous work. May this gathering be fruitful. And may we go out and do his will. Care for the sick. Be there for the poor. Elevate the ideals and values of this nation in the practice and the treatment of all. From those in prison, from those who are elderly, all Americans deserve dignity, deserve hope, deserve the promise and the dream that this country represents.
All right, so we've heard from the senator, my senator, who's a great champion of these issues, of the very same values that we stand for. So now, as we do a deeper dive into the first policy issue, the Farm Bill, I'm going to turn it over to Allegra and Deirdre from the Center for Community Change, and they'll give us some state of play, and then they'll give us how do we move forward on this particular issue. Allegra, the line is yours.
Hi, this is Allegra from the Center for Community Change Action, and I just want to thank you so much for having me here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we stand in the process around reauthorizing the Farm Bill, and then I'll turn it over to Deirdre, who can talk about some action steps that we can all take together. I think that Senator Booker spoke so powerfully to the importance of the Farm Bill in that it is the authorizing bill for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP. This is our country's most important food assistance program. It lifts over 40 million people out of poverty. It has a huge impact on children. Most of the people who receive SNAP are children and seniors and people with disabilities. So our country's most vulnerable people really rely on this critical program. And right now, the program is up to be reauthorized through the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is reauthorized every 5 years and is set to expire by the end of September 30th. If the Farm Bill is not reauthorized, the SNAP program continues as is. The SNAP program will continue to provide food assistance, and there will not be changes to the program. So from our perspective, it's better to see the Farm Bill continue as is than to see any legislation passed which would harm the Farm Bill and include harm SNAP as part of the Farm Bill and include any structural changes or cuts to the SNAP program. So over the last few months, Congress has been working on reauthorizing the Farm Bill. As Senator Booker said, the Senate passed a Farm Bill with overwhelmingly bipartisan support. 86 senators, Democrats and Republicans, voted in support of the Farm Bill reauthorization that protected SNAP, that did not make any harmful structural changes to SNAP, and will allow the SNAP program to continue helping millions of people to access food, the food that they need. Over on the House side, things have looked very different. The House tried 2 times. The first time they were unsuccessful in passing their version of the Farm Bill. The second time they did pass their version of the Farm Bill with only 2 votes to spare. No Democrats supported the bill. The bill passed with Republican support only. And we are very concerned about some of the provisions in the House bill, which have already been mentioned, but wanted to highlight in particular that there is a big expansion of punitive work requirements that we are very concerned about. And in addition to creating new work requirements, the bill includes harsh sanctions for people who are unable to meet those work requirements or to document that they can meet the work requirements. So people will lose benefits as a result of these new barriers to accessing food assistance. And some people will have trouble meeting the work requirements because of how the low-wage labor market is structured and the inability to find a job that meets the requirement in terms of hours. But some people will lose benefits who are actually would be meeting the work requirements, but they can't demonstrate or with that they are meeting the requirements because of the paperwork and the bureaucratic hurdles. States are not in a position to even administer these requirements at this scale. So these new work requirements are going to lead to people losing critical assistance. Researchers who have looked at the House bill say that 1 million households stand to lose or see their benefits reduced, impacting 2 million people, and that includes children and seniors and people with disabilities. In addition, we're also very concerned that the House Farm Bill includes a provision that would ban people who have been convicted of certain crimes from receiving SNAP benefits for life. So it would make it very difficult for people re-entering society to get the help that they need, and that really punitive policy would be in place for life. So we are also very concerned about that provision. The House bill also opens the door to privatizing the function of SNAP benefit enrollment claims, turning that over to private companies. So that is another provision that we are very concerned about. The House and the Senate, because their bills are so different, one bill has passed on the House, one bill has passed on the Senate. These bills are incredibly different. And the next step in the process is that the House and the Senate come together in what's called a conference committee, and they work out in this conference process the differences between the House and the Senate bill. Once the conference committee comes up, the conferees come up with the final bill, the final proposal, that bill will go back to both the House and the Senate for an up or down vote. And if it passes, it then goes to the president's desk for signature. So we expect that early next week, the conferees may have some sort of a public meeting. A lot of work will be taking place over the course of the September between the House and Senate leadership in coming up with this compromise proposal. And during this process, we want to make sure that the harmful provisions that are in the House bill are not in this final compromise bill. And the bill that passed the Senate has overwhelming support from both Republicans and Democrats. And so it is critical that that ultimately is the bill that advances and moves forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Deirdre, who's going to talk about some action items.
Yes. Thank you, Allegra. And thank everybody for being on this call. For those of you all who know me and know my work, you know that I am the fellowship hall person. I'm the person that's going to, give it to you straight. And so we all know people who are on the food stamp program, who participate in the SNAP program. We know they're in our families, they are in our pews, and they're definitely in our community. And so any cuts to the program will always end up hurting our community in the short term. But what is really amazing to me about the time that we're in right now is that these structural changes that especially in the House bill that are being proposed are ones that will have like a long-term effect on how we see this program and who can benefit from the program. And so the tagline that we're just trying to get everyone to say is no bill is better than a bad bill, and to really lean into the progressive nature and the bipartisan nature of the Senate version of the bill. And so to that end, so what can you do? What can you do as a pastor? What can you do as a lay leader? The long and short of it is that the reauthorization is supposed to happen by September the 30th. And so we have a very short time frame, like almost about a month, that we really want to make sure that we're getting to our members of Congress, particularly to the ones on the Senate side, particularly to the ones that are on both the House and Senate side that are moderates, and say to them that we like the Senate version of the bill and that we don't want to see any structural changes like what's laid out around workforce, around work requirements, and around excluding whole swaths of people, in particular folks who have been formerly incarcerated, from having access to the bill. Having access to the program. How do you do that? You need to make a call. If you've done this work before, you know that our members of Congress have staffers, so you don't necessarily have to talk directly to your members of Congress. We hope that you do. We hope that you can use your influence to get a sit-down meeting with them and to bring some of your members that have access to the program to tell their stories. We want you to talk about, as Dr. Leslie Callahan says, that there's not enough soup in our kitchens to absorb the kinds of cuts we're talking about. I love that. So we don't have enough soup in our kitchens to feed another 1 million people across the country. We're having trouble feeding the ones that are coming in right now. So anyway, so we want you to have a sit-down meeting with them. If you can't do that, make a phone call into their offices. Their staff members are tallying right now. They're trying to see, this is an election year, right? So they're trying to see whether or not this issue is salient enough to be something that someone is going to take heed of when they get ready to go back into the voting booth. So the kind of rule of thumb is that for every one phone call that they receive for or against an issue, that there was 100 folks behind that one phone call that were thinking about making the phone call and did it. And so if your members can organize calls into, in particular, your senator's office, into your House of Representatives office, especially if they're, moderate, sit on the fence, or in the Midwest, that would be a help towards us ensuring that we either get the best bill we possibly can out of conference, or that we stall this bill until after the elections and see what we can get next year. The second thing is speak publicly and often about the role that SNAP has played positively in your community. So when I think about how can you do that, you can do that through writing opinion pieces for your local newspapers, your radio stations. Usually, because you all are nonprofits, they have these community spots where you can come in and just say like, hey, I want to do a free spot. It's free. And just have the community understand my position on a particular thing. And so this is not bipartisan work. We're not telling you to, vote for someone. We're not talking about the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, but we're talking specifically around this issue, the issue of food and who gets to eat. And so you can do that work. And then finally, on the level inside of your community, inside of your church, we've developed a 3-part series Bible study on hunger and the Farm Bill, so that you can educate your own membership about the biblical implications of feeding folks, as well as how it shows up in the Farm Bill. And so we encourage you all to, do those 3 things: speak publicly and often about the role of the Farm Bill and your opposition to any bad bill, to write letters to the editor or do some kind of public statement around that. 3, make the calls, and then finally educate your parishioners. So I'm going to turn it back over to Reverend Willie.
Thank you, Allegra, and for giving us that state of play and those marching items. What we're going to do is there have been some questions that have been submitted via the chat, and so we'll address those questions in our Q&A section. So I am keeping up with those. It's easier to get the questions to us via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, in between participants and polling on my screen. It may look a little differently to you, but there's a folder there that has Q&A under it and a Q on it, and that helps me to organize these questions more effectively. But I did see 2 questions that came into the chat that are directed to Deirdre and Allegra. So I will hold those to the end. But as you have questions, please make sure that you key those into the Q&A section. If you can't find it, of course, I will find it in the chat area. But if you do have questions, I encourage you to put those in our Q&A section. Also, we'll have a restatement of these action items at the end. So if you didn't catch them, we will have a restatement of these action items. So we've talked about who has the right to eat. That's what's at stake in the Farm Bill. It's the theological concept of food. Who's worthy of food, and so that's why we're wrestling with this. But we also now we want to shift to this question of the nature of democracy. What is the future of our republic, but also what is the future of democracy? As seemingly the institutions have been under assault since January of last year, and so I'm gonna move now to Brother Elliott and the Committee for a Fair Judiciary to talk to us about Kavanaugh and the SCOTUS confirmation process. Brother Elliott, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I am sorry I'm not on video. My sound was not working for a minute, so I'm just calling in on the phone. So we're good. Anyway, everybody, this nomination is not good for Black people. It is not good for brown people. It is not good, as was said earlier, for LGBT people and women, and the list goes on and on. And there's a lot of things wrong with this nomination. So I'm going to quickly walk you through sort of what the problems with Brett Kavanaugh are. Then I'm going to walk you through where we are in the process with Brett Kavanaugh. And then finally talk a little bit about some actions that you and your clergy and your congregations and your communities can take to address this. The most important point, above all else, remember, this is not a foregone conclusion. It is not over yet, and people and activists and communities are still fighting and are going to keep fighting. If you followed politics over the years, Robert Bork was defeated, Harriet Miers was withdrawn, and many others in the years prior to that didn't make it to the end. All of them, there was a point in the process where it was a foregone conclusion that they were going to be confirmed to the Supreme Court. And for all of them, something went wrong in the process to change things. So here's the problem with Brett Kavanaugh. One, he would favor the wealthy and powerful over the rights of everyday people. If you look at, he has a long record as a judge going back, I think, over a decade here in Washington, D.C., of consistently ruling with wealthy and powerful interests over the little guy. And frankly, that means, the case may not have been about black and brown people, but at the end of the day, when we talk about the little guy, what we're talking about is people of color in the United States. So that's part of it. Another big part is that we haven't even seen Brett Kavanaugh's record yet. Just some quick background. When he was in the White House back in the Bush administration, he served in both the White House counsel's office, the lawyer's office for the White House, but also in the White House staff secretary's office. It's this office that controls the information that goes to the President of the United States. We're not allowed to see any of his documents from his time in the staff secretary's office. That's a deliberate decision that was made by the Republicans in the Senate and the White House to not allow any of those documents to come out. So we're not even seeing the full record here. And it's the question you in your communities and we as Black people and people of color need to ask is, what are they hiding? What is it about Brett Kavanaugh's time in the White House that can't come out and can't be made forward? And finally, just every issue that your communities probably care about, from the Affordable Care Act and health care for people who, just health care in general, the pre-existing conditions, the denial of health care based on pre-existing conditions, reproductive rights, Roe v. Wade, to the extent people are animated by that. All of these things are at risk with a nominee like Brett Kavanaugh. And as Brother Willie said at the top of the call, this was an individual picked from a list of far-right people from President Trump. So he is, he hasn't said it publicly. He's committed ultimately, or we know where he's going to be on all of these issues. So let's not, as a community, be fooled about whether Brett, you hear a lot about how he's a nice guy and he's so smart and he's, he drives his daughters to carpool and he's been a great judge. And that's all well and good. He might, frankly, be a wonderful human being. But that doesn't mean he's fit to serve on the Supreme Court for the rest of his life. A quick just background, I didn't say who we are as the Committee for a Fair Judiciary. We exist, we are a 501c4 organization that exists to educate and inform the government, mostly U.S. senators, on the need and the importance of having a progressive federal judiciary, a judiciary that we believe best reflects an America that is based on the principles America says it was founded on, and mostly being equality and fairness. So in terms of action that folks can take, we're going to talk about 3. I'm going to plant 3 in your head, and you can follow up with us via email afterward, and I'll give you right now, my email address is ewilliams, EWILLIAMS, @rabengroup, RABENGROUP.com. And you can also, we can also circulate that after. But 3 things we'd love help with in engaging your communities in the next week. To the extent you are able to work in this question about the Supreme Court and access to justice and access to equality and the America that we envision into your sermons this Sunday, that would be quite helpful because that could reach potentially thousands of people across America in very critical communities. Number two, we would love to see op-eds or opinion pieces. And let me make an important point here. We will help you write them. We will definitely help you write them and give you everything you need and largely put it together for you about this issue to run early next week. And finally, we'd love to put together a call-in day in September where people can where we can inspire people to action on September 4th. Some quick words on process and where we are. So we have in a number of groups and a number of senators and the whole civil rights community has been pushing for the delay of the hearing, or frankly, the cancellation of the hearing altogether. They're still pushing forward with the hearing on Judge Kavanaugh. That will be Tuesday, September 4th, and it'll stretch through the rest of that week. And so there still is room for action and community engagement all through next week. And we'd love everybody's help and support in engaging and getting folks excited around communities all around America as that hearing is going on next week. So we can address some of this later on, but those are the big things. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you, Elliot, and the Committee for a Fair Judiciary for that update on where we are in the process and our chances we have for stopping this nomination. So I want to thank both groups, Center for Community Change and the Committee for a Fair Judiciary for outlining the moral imperative and the moral vulnerability that we live in as a result of a farm bill that threatens access to food for millions of Americans and decides who deserves to eat and who does not deserve to eat, exaggerating, expanding the American food apartheid, and also for talking to us about how this type of appointment, this particular appointment, threatens the very fabric of our democratic experiment. So I thank you for that. If you have questions, remember to populate those questions either preferably in the Q&A section, as some people have done. But if you're having difficulty getting there, also you can put it in the chat, and I am at the BCC team is reviewing those, so make sure we don't miss any. Just before we go into our question and answer period, I want us to hear from our clergy, hear from a millennial faith leader who has been deeply involved in issues of justice in so many organizations. I'm going to turn the line over to Reverend Stephen Green. Steve.
Thank you, President Francois, and to all who are gathered on this call tonight, and to Dr. Coates, our chairman. It is a cumbersome upon us at this very critical moment that we must do something to resist the Supreme Court nomination of Judge Kavanaugh. We are called in this moment as the anniversary of not just the March on Washington, but the anniversary of the death of Emmett Till, to recognize that the blood of our children is crying out for us to be able to engage in a way of moral and nonviolent militant resistance. It is cumbersome upon us as we look to these next days, as we are about 70 some odd days from the November election, that all of the engagements, or if you will, of these moods that we're seeing across the country are playing into a singular narrative to really show the power of resistance in November. To this end, the AME Church and faith leaders across the country are calling for a call to conscience on September the 6th in Washington, D.C. at Lafayette Park to begin to really raise the moral conscience of this nation and to provide a stark contradiction to the evangelical Christian narrative that has continued to purport or allege that Donald Trump is continuing to abide by a level of moral authority. So we're intending to shift the narrative and to recognize that moral authority belongs to those who are poor, to those who are black and brown, to those who are incarcerated, to those who are on the side of the oppressed and the disenfranchised in society. So I would like to encourage all faith leaders to join us and to join us on Social Justice Sunday, every Sunday in September, to really lift up the cause and the cry of justice for our people. This is going to take a level of heightened direct action and heightened moral militancy. We're encouraging that clergy and faith-based leaders would meet with their U.S. senators. The problem is that we also have senators on both sides of the aisle who are willing to acquiesce to political expediency when instead of it being political correctness or righteousness. And so we're encouraging that we engage our U.S. senators in district offices, that the power of being able to mobilize and to risk arrest and to do pray-ins at your U.S. Senator's district office will be able to lift up and with your local press and people who they have to be held accountable to when they return home into their districts and look forward to re-election every 6 years. So we're encouraging faith leaders across the country after September the 6th to schedule pray-ins in your U.S. Senator's office, not just on the issue of Kavanaugh, but also on the issue of our moral and prophetic agenda as it relates to the Farm Bill, as it relates to criminal justice reform, as it relates to voting rights, and recognizing that this is the first major election under the Donald Trump presidency with Jefferson Beauregard Sessions as the Attorney General without Section 54B of the Voting Rights Act. It's different when you have a Loretta Lynch or a Eric Holder occupying the seat of the Attorney General when you go to the ballot box without the Voting Rights Act. It's going to be very unique when you go to the polls with the Jefferson Beauregard Sessions. So we have a prophetic and a moral agenda that is requiring us to engage in moral, nonviolent militancy in order to be able to project and really to create the beloved world community that we want to see. So I want to thank you, Dr. Coates and Pastor Francois, for this opportunity to encourage and to really push our faith leaders and moral leaders to be able to anchor down, as Marcus Garvey said, up ye mighty race, accomplish what you will. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Brother Green, for giving us that clergy perspective, the historical context that gets us here. We obviously know we're not here overnight, but there are certain forces, certain experiences, events that have ushered us into this current political crisis, even as it looks like we're teetering with a constitutional crisis in Washington because of the criminality of this president, of this administration. So I thank you for that. It's important to say again, to underscore what Reverend Green said about the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, its relationship to the Supreme Court and the future of our democracy. We often talk, this is my opinion, we often talk about the illegitimacy of President Trump as it relates to the Russian collusion, Russian interference. But Brother Green raises a very different point concerning the illegitimacy of this president, because this was the first presidential election since the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. This is the first presidential election since the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. This is the most vulnerable we have been to voter suppression since it was signed into law. And so the illegitimacy of President Trump does not have to reach beyond the shores of this nation to identify it, but it can be identified simply because this is a president that did lose the popular vote, of course, but this is a president that was elected without certain protections for communities of color. And so I thank you for raising that point. We have some questions that have been submitted, and I'm going to do my best to navigate these. I'll address them to the persons that either were identified by the attendee or persons who I think are set to answer these questions. I'll start with our questions related to the Farm Bill, related to SNAP, related to food justice. I think Deirdre's still online, and if Allegra is still with us, either one of you can address this for us. But are there senators or congresspersons that we can target to ensure? Are there any swing voters, any potential swing voters as it relates to the Farm Bill that we can put our energy toward, that we can direct energy and activism towards?
So can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So yes, there's two sets of folks. So one is just the conference appointees for the committee, and mainly those are folks in the Midwest. There's Pat Roberts in Kansas, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, Hoven in North Dakota, Joni Ernst in Iowa, Ranking Member Debbie Stabenow from Michigan, Patrick Leahy from Vermont, Sherrod Brown from Ohio, and Heidi Heitkamp from North Dakota. So I will send these lists to you, and then you can actually send it out to the folks who are here via email. The thing that I want to be clear about is that you definitely want to talk to your own members of Congress as well, your senators as well. But they have like a rapport with each other as it relates to like colleagues, right? And so like when we took a set of Black ministers to talk with Senator Booker earlier this year, and also I want to say we went to go see Debbie Stabenow as well, and they wrote dear colleague letters around what they wanted to see happen in the Senate version of the bill. And so you can definitely talk to your own senators around this issue, but then also as it relates to the conference committee, like the conference appointees, because they're holding the whole, you also can have a conversation with them. And then I also sent around the vote count for both the House and the Senate. The Senate was like pristine. It was like 83-17. And we were the Democrats have been very clear about just holding the line on, issues of poverty in particular, but like just staying on a partisan line. But it is always good to hear from your folks. And so I'll send both of those lists out to you, Reverend Francois, and you can get it out to the folks.
Okay. Thank you so much. I want to ask the same question. This question comes from the floor, but I want to ask the same question to Elliot as it relates to the SCOTUS vote. Are there any potential senators that we need to put pressure on to get a stop of the hearing process or to stop the vote itself, or that it's possible to flip it?
So I don't have it in front of me, and we'll send this around. What we have done is we've broken out 3 categories of senators. There's about maybe 15 of them total that we think are deserving of some love for this week. And what they are is, number one, Democrats who we are asking to be more forceful. So for instance, a number of so a great example, Mazie Hirono is a senator from Hawaii, and is probably the most vocal member of the Democratic caucus on judicial nominations issues. But up until this past week, she hadn't officially come out opposing Brett Kavanaugh. Now she's there and she's on the record, but she hadn't been there yet, right? So there's maybe 6, 7 Democratic senators that we think really need some love, need to hear from communities to say, you have been a stalwart ally to the African-American community over the years. You've been a great ally to, to people in need. Why haven't you come out and, even before the hearing, officially oppose this confirmation? I actually now have it, and one of my colleague Rachel just sent it. So those folks are Maria Cantwell, Ben Cardin, Catherine Cortez Masto, Tim Kaine, Angus King, and John Tester. Again, don't worry, we'll send this around, so you don't need to take notes or anything like that. All right. So there's Democrats who just need to, they're going to vote against them for the most part, most of these people, because they're in safe seats or whatever, but we're not getting the fire from them that we need in this fight, right? Second category of senators are Democrats who, they've been trying to be cute because they're in tough election states or they're, under the gun a little bit, or they're in states that Trump won. The big ones being Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota, Claire McCaskill in Missouri, Joe Donnelly in Indiana, and the big one, Joe Manchin in West Virginia. He was the first senator, even before any of the Senate leaders. He was the first one to actually meet with Kavanaugh. So those are folks who, we just need to get those folks. And so those are the other ones. The last category is a couple Republicans who either haven't announced their position yet, or we think if things were to go sour for Kavanaugh, could be counted on to vote against him. The big ones are Susan Collins in Maine and Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, but there's a few others. Rob Portman in Ohio is one. He's been tough for our folks to get through to, but it's a possibility. Marco Rubio in Florida. It's a swing state that has a lot of Black and brown people, and a lot of people that care about health care, and so he's potentially. And the other big one that we have on this list, because the big Latino population in Nevada, is Dean Heller from Nevada. Now, he has made the political calculation to wrap his arms around Donald Trump, but still we are targeting him as someone. So that's the list in a nutshell. We will send it around, but those are the folks that, and not just if you can reach out to these people individually, if you're in these states, your actions of talking about this at sermons, or doing an op-ed, or engaging your community, an op-ed in a traditionally African-American newspaper, or a traditionally African-American city in your homes is potentially quite valuable. So that's that.
Thank you so much, Elliot. I want to remind everyone that Elliot and Deirdre, so both the Committee for a Fair Judiciary and the Center for Community Change, are willing to work with persons who are interested in writing op-eds. They're willing to help you craft those op-eds, and I'm assuming some assistance in getting those placed. So do take advantage of that opportunity. Also, Deirdre mentioned it, and I'll say it again, that the Black Church Center has developed a toolkit for both of these issues, and this toolkit includes sample letters to our representatives, our House representatives, and letters to our senators, call-in scripts to our lawmakers, and it also includes some liturgical pieces that will include a litany, some sample prayers, and not only to work in our worship setting, but also a 3-part Bible study series. So the Black Church Center has developed a 3-part Bible study series for those of us to push through to use in September, primarily as we raise awareness about the Farm Bill, raise awareness about food justice, as we wrestle with this theological question of how our democracy is getting to decide who deserves food. And so that's going to be very important. So that will be made available to everybody who's on the call and our entire listserv. So please, if you're not on our consistent mailer, our consistent e-blast, you can go to Black Church Center, all spelled out, Black Church Center @gmail.com. Somebody will put that in the chat for us. Black Church Center, I think Yvonne's going to do it for us. Black Church Center @gmail.com. You can email us your information there, and we'll plug you into our consistent e-blast. And also those who have registered for this event, if you registered and you submitted your email, we'll definitely be able to kick that information back to you. So that's how you'll get, it's through this toolkit, through this follow-up process, that will get you the names of these lawmakers that we can target on both issues. We'll also get you some more information about the Farm Bill, because it may be a new bill. It may be a new piece of legislation for many of us. Even though many of us know about SNAP and food stamps, we don't often realize how it is funded, how it is reauthorized. So we'll make sure we get you that information. And You'll have you'll have in that toolkit some sample Bible studies for small groups and for congregational leading. So I did want to make sure everyone understood that those items are on the way and will be made available in the next day or so. Primarily because on Friday, on the 31st, we want all of us that can to participate in a digital day of action. The 31st of August is SNAP's birthday. What food stamps, its birthday. And so we want to celebrate, lift up stories, talk about how important this anti-hunger program is for us as people of color and people of faith. There's a question that this call is not connected to the Poor People's Campaign. We've done work, many of us on the call have done work with the Poor People's Campaign, but this particular call is not connected per se to the Poor People's Campaign. There's another question here about the toolkit. I answered the question about the toolkit. We'll make that available to everyone who is registered for this call. We'll make that available to everyone in the next day. So hope tomorrow we'll make that link live. We'll email that link to everybody who's a part of our listserv and persons who are a part of who registered for this call, and to make sure that you have that. Deirdre, is it possible for you to talk about some of the cuts, some of the proposed cuts and changes to SNAP that this farm bill has again? Can you list that one of our attendees would like to hear again some of those proposed changes?
Yeah, and again, if we were on this call talking about SNAP as it relates to cuts, we would be talking in dollars and cents. We'd say, oh, they're going to cut this program by $5 million, $20 million, whatever. That happens every year. Every year we debate, like, trying to make sure that we're balancing our budget, so to speak, right? This is not about balancing a budget. This is about changing the fundamental structure of how the program runs and who has access to the program. And so I want that to be like super clear that it is, it's on par, so to speak, with what's going on with the Supreme Court, because it is about what is this democracy about and what is the social contract. And so these two things shouldn't be looked at as like one is higher or lower than the other, but like that this is all about like an all-out offensive, fight, a fight for what it means to be an American in this country and have access to the social contract. So having said that, so what do these changes look like? These structural changes look like? I wrote it in the chat around just having these additional work requirements. So the very first thing is that if you remember the Clinton era and the changes to to SNAP back in those days, or access to programs for folks who are low income, right? They changed that a long time ago. There's a work requirement. So this is not new. This is not like, oh, they're just requiring people to work. It's like, no, this is a wedge issue. People are already required to try to figure out how to find work. Now we need to talk, a longer conversation, a larger conversation about like, what does it look like to work in America at this time? And can people, people don't have one job, they have 2 and 3 jobs and still can't make ends meet. So this idea of additional work requirements is really like Allegra said, it's about the bureaucracy of having people come in every week or every month and, say what their income is for that month, and then their benefits be adjusted, or, they get disqualified monthly, right? Instead of the way in which it's done currently, which is quarterly and sometimes yearly, depending upon your state. But what's the idea behind it? The idea is to perpetuate this false narrative around that there's so much fraud in the program, and that the reason that you have to do this is because of fraud. And so we want to first, just say that's a lie from the pit of hell. Can we do that? That's Deirdre and her church work. It's a lie from the pit of hell that folks are just fraudulently, amassing all of this money and, the idea of the quote unquote, the welfare queen. And so but who it will affect, this bureaucracy, it will affect like your waitresses, your hourly workers. So it will affect Yemi Thomas out of, Atlanta, Georgia. Yemi is a daycare worker. If she picks up an extra 2 hours of work and she makes $11 an hour, then those 2 hours, those $22, past, we're not talking about how much they tax her on those $22, but those extra $22 will disqualify her from the $135 a month in food stamps that her and her family would get. And so you see how disproportionate that is, and how it does not promote economic stability nor economic mobility. And so we should be thinking of these safety net programs as what they are, like a safety net. The second thing is it would have a lifetime ban for formerly incarcerated community members who were convicted of certain offenses. And so that's a tie directly into, our public school to prison pipeline work. It's tied directly into the idea that, we want to do some justice work around the criminalization of the poor. Here you're criminalizing them again. So if you're convicted of a certain crime, that you would never be able to access the food program. And so those are the two major structural changes that we're looking that were on the House version of the bill, that we're looking to make sure it doesn't go into this into the conference version of the bill and get voted on. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for those clarifications. It's important to talk about how bills like this, like the House version of the bill, and I do want to acknowledge the fact that the Senate bill is better than the House bill, of course, but the Senate bill doesn't go far enough in terms of expanding access to food, which I think also needs to be a part of our demand, that we need to demand the type of legislation that guarantees a meal for every family. And so while it is better, while it is better than the House bill, the Senate bill could be better. Am I wrong? Yeah, it could be better. Thought so. Yeah, because these types of bills, it sounds to me like the work requirements that are being mapped on to these bills fall in line with, as I said earlier, the president's declaration that the war on poverty has been won, his economic policy, which was echoed and documented with very unique metrics by his Council of Economic Advisors back in July, and not to mention that the president himself signed an executive order in April, I believe it was, that called on all federal agencies to enforce and over-enforce work requirements. And a lot of this works into this narrative of stigmatizing people of color, this long narrative of saying Black people don't work, Black people, Black and brown folk are freeloaders. It's this idea of Black pathology and Black laziness are being written into the fabric of our law, and I think that's also what we need to fight against, this moral narrative that's being this immoral narrative that's being written into our law that says that people of color don't work for what they have. These people of color are lazy, and that's been a part of the American legal process.
Hi, Everett.
The American law. Seemingly, that's been a part of the American law even since the Black codes, when Black men, former slaves, were arrested and incarcerated because they didn't have jobs, so to speak. It's this, and we know why they didn't have jobs, because the former slave masters didn't hire them in many cases, right? But this idea of making a part of the legal tradition of America to penalize people of color, primarily historically Black people, because they're lazy, because they don't work. So this is very much an American policy that we're fighting against. It's not an aberration to what America has done with this law, but it follows in line with that. So thank you for that. I have a question here Yes, this call will be available for on-demand view. We'll make sure that that's a part of the email that we send out. It's recording as we speak, so we'll make sure that folk will have access to this recording once we send out our toolkit, send out the information around who our targets are for both, who our legislative targets are for SNAP and for the SCOTUS issue, and our toolkit, which includes a 3-series Bible study on food justice that is really going to be a great enhancement to your September schedule, because not only will you be engaging in the scripture, but you'll also be using your Bible study experiences as opportunities to create incubators for resistance and movement building. So we're looking forward to pushing that out to you. Are there any questions that I missed? Team, are there any questions that I missed? I saw Dr. Coates was making some comments about who the real beneficiaries of American welfare are. And you can find that in the chat. I have a question here that says, we saw Congress allow CHIP to expire, which is a children's health insurance program. What is the long game for working to save SNAP? I think this should go to Deirdre. What is the long game for working to save SNAP? And also, I lack faith in this Congress, is what the attendee has said. So can you help us? What's the long game? We know what we're going to do over the next 30 days, but what happens after 30 days? Because the bill is reauthorized every 5 years. Am I right about that? 5 years? So what do we do? Yes. Next 5 years as a proactive response to what we know is a historical assault on working class families in this country?
Absolutely. So I really think that I'm going to turn this back over to you, Reverend Francois, and to Dr. Coates around what, like the agenda of the Black Church Center for Justice and Equality, because I do think that what we're seeing right now with the Republican Party being in office, and I can say that in some good C4 language, is that they clearly said that that they don't believe in safety net programs, nor in the way in which we ideologically and fundamentally look at poverty in this country, right? And so, like, it was okay in different eras because they didn't have the political will of the people, nor did they have the votes to be able to carry out some of the things that they wanted to do. We're seeing right now, like right at this minute in this particular session, that they actually, they're very close. And so it's going to really be up to us to tie what we're seeing with the Affordable Care Act, with CHIP reauthorization, with the expansion of the Affordable Care Act, like on the state level. So the expansion of Medicaid, which was promised under the Obama administration, but we've not been able to see it in many of our states. We need to tie all of this safety net work to this midterm election. And so how are we lifting up the issues of poverty and the criminalization of poverty, which gets us to our folks who are our mass incarceration folks, right? Like, how are we talking about poverty and the criminalization of poverty through this midterm election and on into the 2020 election? So I think that's the goal of the work that we're starting here. Like, they kind of laid they've laid down an agenda about what they're, first starting with the tax cuts from last fall. And then now saying we don't have any money to feed the poor, we don't have money to do to continue to fund these safety net programs. It's going to be up to us to actually get out of this reactive and defensive mode and get into a proactive mode around organizing the electorate. And so that was long-winded, but I clearly want to hear from the Black Church Center around how you all are seeing the next, 6 months worth of work, the midterm elections, and how you could envision engaging this body of clergy.
Yeah. So some quick things that we'll be doing. One is we'll be engaging in what we're not calling a report card, but what we will be keeping up with the records of our elected officials as we move towards midterms, and particularly how they have voted on safety net programs in the past. And so we want to make sure that there's a public concentrated record on how, particularly the congresspersons and the senators who are up for election this cycle will chronicle their history of voting as it relates to safety net and other economic policies. So that's one thing we'll be doing. We're looking forward to in the fall after the election hosting a post-election summit that will deal with economic justice issues, primarily around social safety net programs. And we'll be releasing information about where that is and when that'll be, but we'll have a post-election conversation because, although we're deeply invested in what it takes to have a liberative, emancipatory politic, to arise to triumph this election cycle, what we do know is that our long game has to also look toward 2020. So as we look toward 2020, we'll have a post-election summit that will make sure everybody has information so we can strategize around various issues and figure out who our targets are and what a concerted agenda is. I see someone here asked if we'll be supporting the national Black agenda, and we'll definitely put out some information around what our legislative agenda is for the next 2 years. Brother Steve Green, who's on the phone, who shared with us today, he's the president of the People's Consortium, and he and I have been in deep conversation in the past 2 to 3 months about a Black church legislative agenda. What does an emancipatory, liberative legislative agenda look like? Because at the end of the day, we believe that freedom is possible, and because we have not achieved full freedom yet. What I like to reference from Du Bois, we have not achieved abolition democracy yet. There's still too many institutions in this country that need to be replaced by institutions that are actually invested in abolition, in freedom. So we'll have a legislative agenda that will be released as we move through the next several weeks, as we're preparing to do some strong activism around the midterms, but really as we look toward what kind of outcomes do we want in 2020. So I won't be releasing those today, but do know we're having some serious conversations about what our economic policy agenda is. And I'll turn over to Dr. Coates now if he cares to share with a project that the Black Church Center is deeply invested in, this new abolitionism campaign, which I think gets at the heart of, it's really at the heart of these economic symptoms that we're talking about. Because what we've been talking about today are economic symptoms, but how we actually mount structural change, I think will be important. So Dr. Coates, can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Thank you, Reverend Francois and Deirdre, for putting us on the spot on this question, but it's important. We need to be put on the spot. Our people are facing so many critical issues today, and tonight has just been an important conference call, town hall, and I want to thank all of the presenters. As Reverend Francois mentioned, the Black Church Center for Justice and Equality has been for the past 15, 18 months working on an economic justice campaign that really focuses on the relationship between our monetary system in America and the range of social and economic issues that we face. We have been calling this the new abolitionism, right? Making the case that the new freedom movement, liberation movement is a liberation from a kind of macroeconomic approach to policy making, fiscal policy, and monetary policy that causes and creates the range of systemic problems in part that we've been discussing tonight, and many others that folks are talking about in the chat room, whether it's the children's health insurance, this sort of felt sense that the federal government doesn't have the money to fund the children's health insurance program or the SNAP program. What is very interesting is that the federal government is able to find money on you know, some issues. It's like $12 billion can just like fall from the sky, you know, when it comes to, I don't know, putting a space force in outer space, you know, creating a military force in outer space, you know, $20 billion just kind of gets manufactured out of nowhere. And, you know, another set of priorities. We need faith leaders to really understand in a thorough at an in-depth level our monetary system in America. Right now, and we'll probably have other town halls on this, Pastor Francois. What many faith leaders don't understand is that right now, 90% of what we use as money in our society is created by private banks when they make loans, right? And so we really have a credit-based money system, which really causes and creates a whole host of systemic problems in our economy and in our monetary system. And what we need is we need to democratize the money system, where we rely more and more on the creation of money through public spending to fund all of the public priorities that we care about, so that as a nation, we rely less and less on private bank lending for money or the medium of exchange. I won't go into it here, but I'm really excited about this monetary reform effort that we have been working on. It is our hope that over the next few months, we'll have a new website up that focuses on this campaign. We have just completed 10 short videos, short 3 to 4 minute educational instructional videos about our monetary system. Hopefully next month or early October, we will start production on an 8-minute micro documentary on our monetary system. Our program director, Dr. Tamika Scales, is working on this with our policy director, Spencer Veal, and several others. So I want everyone listening to keep your eyes, your ears open for this economic justice campaign that we've been working on for quite some time. Thank you, Pastor Francois.
Thank you, Dr. Coates. I also want to, I failed to mention, and as soon as I say this, I'm going to turn it over to Deirdre to give us, to recap those items, those action items on what we can do around SNAP. And then if Elliot is still on the call, Elliot will talk to us about those action items that we can handle, that we can take on as it relates to SCOTUS. But I do want to say for persons who will be in the DC area during CBC weekend, we are planning a pop-up event during that weekend in DC to talk more about safety net issues, to talk more about the Farm Bill, depending on where it is at that time, and to talk in depth about some of the foundational work of this economic policy agenda that we're working on. So keep your eyes out for that pop-up event. It's not an official event of CBC. I don't want anybody to think we're having an official event in CBC. It's a pop-up event in the middle of CBC because the Black church does have an agenda, and our elected officials like Cory Booker need to know what we need. And that's important. And I'll say this, I'm shifting. It's important because so often as clergy, we sign on to other people's legislative agendas. Elected officials, politicians come to us and say, can you support this? And, you know, in many cases, we often talk about this as renting a robe. And so we're moving away from this rent a robe process where politicians get to use us to push their agenda. And we're really coming with our own legislative agenda. And we're going to hold these elected officials accountable for what we need and how we understand our democracy. So, Deirdre.
So right now the poll is up. I'm not sure if everybody can see it, but there's a poll that the Black Church Center for Justice and Equality has up for folks to fill out. As it relates to SNAP, we have a small window here in September to try to make calls into our representatives' offices and into the conferees' offices to just talk about why we are opposing the House version of the bill and why we're supporting the Senate version of the bill. I want to say in our toolkit, there's some good talking points that you all can use, and so feel free to do that. The second thing is to speak often and publicly about SNAP. I think the one thing I do want to say that I don't think I've said before is that I know, as, clergy, we want to be the policy experts. You're used to doing a lot of research and, hermeneutics and all kind of other stuff. It's like, you don't need that for this. For this, you need the real story of how it's going to impact your church, how it's going to impact your food bank, how it's going to impact the congregants that sit in your pews, individual stories from people that that are going to be affected by this work. It was so amazing when we took clergy to do Senate visits at the beginning of the year, because most of they have staff that talk about what are the statistics, how many people will get, who will not have access, who will have access. That's not what our members of Congress need. What they need to be able to do is to stand on the floor and be able to say, you know what? I talked to Reverend Dr. Delman Coates, and he said this is what's going to happen to his member if I do this. They need those personal stories. They need to hear from you from that very human perspective. And so making those calls into members of Congress's offices, going ahead and working on doing an op-ed for your local paper. We will help to support you in the writing of that op-ed. We'll help you with the support of placing those op-eds. I put my information, Reed at the Center for Community Change.org in the chat box. Also, you can reach directly out to the Black Church Center. I actually would prefer that you do that so that we can coordinate that with their leadership, so that we can keep an accurate account of where we'll place these op-eds. So those are the two things that we will really need in the short term. In the midterm, we need you to be a safety net voter and to promote safety net voters in the midterm. And in the long term, we need to develop this anti-poverty agenda.
Just before we go on, I want to acknowledge a question from Dr. Virgil Wood, more of a statement that he would like to connect with Dr. Coates and I, the Black Church Center, around some beloved community, beloved economy ideas, and he left his contact information. So Dr. Wood, if you're still on, we'll definitely follow up with you in the near future. I do know that you do have experience and advocacy around monetary reform. So the conversation is definitely welcomed, and we'll follow up on that. Brother Elliot, are you still on the line?
Hi there, this is Rachel. I work with Elliot. He unfortunately had to hop off.
Thank you, Rachel.
Hi. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're just action items as we round off the call. Are there any action items that you want to leave us with? Elliot gave us a few, but are there any action items you want to leave us with as we move toward September?
Absolutely. Thanks so much. The first big one is really reaching out to those senators and perhaps even a call-in day. It's really important, especially as constituents, that senators hear from you, and we'll send those key senators around as a follow-up from the call. As Elliot mentioned, we're also interested in helping or supporting writing op-eds. We have plenty of talking points there, and we're happy if you reach out. We would love to work on writing that with you. And my colleague Elliot's email is ewilliams@rabengroup.com. And then we also have messaging, just to use to speak to your communities or churches, talking points about how Kavanaugh's nomination will really impact communities of color in a very deep way. So happy to send around those messaging points as well, just to facilitate those conversations.
Thank you so much, Elliot. Thank you, Deirdre and Allegra. And all the others who helped to make this call possible. We are ending on time, but as we close, I want to remind us, be on the lookout for the toolkit that the Black Church Center has developed on these two issues. This is a toolkit that will include the target legislators that we can focus on both issues, who are the swing voters, who are the potential swing voters for this issue, for these two issues. Also, there will be sample call-in and letters for us for those persons. That will also be in the toolkit. The Committee for a Fair Judiciary talked about September 4th being a call-in day, and so you'll get more information about that, and you'll have the resources in this toolkit that will help you make these calls with ease and provide the necessary information. Also in this toolkit is the 3-part Bible study series. You don't want to miss out on this resource to engage your congregation, your small group, your community around Bible study and Bible reflection, theological engagement around food and food justice as we think about SNAP and how Congress thinks that it can legislate who has the right to eat. So I want you to pay attention to that. It's great Bible study resource with reflection questions, with illustrations, with exegesis already in there for you. And a part of this toolkit is a social media action plan. Our digital coordinator has worked with our Faith in Action fellow, and we have come together to develop these various aspects of this toolkit. And so you will also have an opportunity to determine how you engage social media on these digital action days that we have set up. So all the resources to do this work will be provided to you. So I'm grateful for everyone who was able to join and stick with us for the full 90 minutes. Dr. Coates?
Yes, I'm wondering if I can ask Rachel a question. Rachel, are you still on?
Certainly, yes.
Yes. One of the responses we often get at least that I've received when I've reached out to members of the Senate, is that they have said in their interviews with Kavanaugh, he has said that Roe v. Wade is settled law, right? This is a response that is often given from moderate Republican senators who have used this issue or this response to say, well, I'm going to support Kavanaugh, right? So I'm wondering what kind of responses or pushback or challenges might those of us and those senators who oppose Kavanaugh to kind of deconstruct this particular perspective, that he's safe because he says Roe is settled law?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for raising. And really, we kind of feel that saying it's settled law is a bit of a cop-out. We're looking for him to say Roe v. Wade is something that I support, or affirmative action is something that I support directly. And at the end of the day, his legal record speaks for itself. He's voted or dissented against a young immigrant woman looking to seek an abortion at the D.C. District Court. Looking kind of at his record and at his opinions and seeing kind of where his vote will lie on the Supreme Court in that way. So we have talking points related to specific court cases, and I'm happy to send those around to kind of dispel any sort of clever talking points from Kavanaugh in those meetings, right? Saying that Roe v. Wade is settled law, but then having voted against or ruled against a young woman seeking an abortion doesn't feel very genuine, right? So kind of having that backup, I found has been helpful when we're speaking with senators.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Again, thank you, everyone. Look out for those various things that I named. We'll be sending out an email with access to the toolkit and the information. And also mark your calendars. Mark your calendars for September 25th. We'll do it on a Tuesday again, September 25th, for Black Church Agenda, the September edition, as we talk about voting, poverty, and the midterms. Voting, poverty, and the midterms. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Look forward to engaging in this good fight.